There was a night, some years ago now, when I rode a good horse into the ground beneath me, felt his great heart burst upon a black road 40 miles from any town I knew, and went on afoot into the dark with my boots full of mire, and my whole soul bent upon a single house and a single woman I had sworn to reach before morning. I set that down first, plainly, so that whoever reads this shall understand from the outset the extremity to which I was brought. For I am not a man given to extravagance, and I had passed the better part of my 34 years believing that a Duke of Merriton kept his composure though the world fell about him. That night I learned otherwise. That night I learned what it is to love a woman past the reach of pride, and to know her carried off into the power of a man I mistrusted with every fibre I possessed, and to feel the miles between us like a hand about my throat. I mean to tell the whole of it, from the beginning, that the reader may judge whether I did rightly or no. But I will tell you now that she lived, and that I lived, and that the name she bears today is mine. All the rest is the account of how nearly it came to being otherwise. Her name was Helena Carew, and I had loved her 3 years before ever this catastrophe befell us. I do not say it lightly, nor as a young man says it who has confused a season's fever with the settled devotion of a lifetime. I had come to her a man already sobered by responsibility, having buried my father and taken up the burden of his titles and his tangled affairs while I was yet too young for either. And when I met Helena at a house in Hampshire, one wet autumn when neither of us had thought to be moved by anything, I found in her a steadiness that answered my own. She was then some 23, an heiress of gentle birth and no great connection, her parents dead, her fortune considerable, and her person under the guardianship of a maternal cousin of her father's, one Mr. Barnaby Kell. She was not a beauty in the vulgar sense that turns heads across a ballroom. She was better than that. She had a grave, warm face that grew luminous when she was moved, a low voice, and a way of meeting one's eyes directly, as though she disdained the small dishonesties by which most of us conduct our lives. I loved her for her courage before ever I loved her for anything else, and I have never since had cause to revise that first estimation. I dwell upon her a moment longer, for the reader must know her well to understand what followed, and to weigh at its true value the cost of what I so nearly let be lost. She read a great deal, and thought upon what she read, and had opinions she was not afraid to hold against a room full of gentlemen who supposed a woman's business was to agree, yet she held them without heat and without any wish to wound, which is a rarer thing than wit. She was kind to servants and to old women and to the tenants' children, and unafraid of the sick room, and I had seen her sit a whole grey afternoon by a dying gamekeeper's wife when finer ladies had found reasons to be elsewhere. There was in her, beneath the gentleness, a spine of tempered steel that only trouble ever called forth, and it was that steel, I am persuaded, which kept her alive and sane through the long ordeal I am to relate, when a softer woman must have broken. I did not fully measure it in those early Hampshire days. I only knew that when she was in a room I was easier in my own skin, and that when she was not, some savour was gone out of the hour, and a man of 34 who has buried his father and grown weary of his own heart does not mistake that quiet certainty for anything but what it is. We were, in the plain sense of the word, understood. I had spoken, she had not refused me. There wanted only the forms and her guardian's consent, which I did not then imagine could be withheld from a match so far above anything the girl might reasonably have looked for. And there, precisely there, I made the first of the errors that were to cost us both so dear, for I did not press. I had been summoned abroad upon a matter I could not in honour decline, a younger brother in difficulties in the Low Countries, a family disgrace to be quietly undone, a debt of blood and name that fell to me as head of the house, and I went, believing that a fortnight's business would see it settled, and that Helena would keep, as steadfast things keep. A fortnight became 3 months. The business proved fouler and deeper than I had been told, and by the time I had dragged my brother from the pit he had dug and set the family's honour to rights, the autumn had turned to a hard spring, and my letters to Helena had gone month upon month without reply. I know now what I did not know then, that not one of those letters reached her. Mr. Barnaby Kell had made certain of it. I have since held in my own hand the seals he broke and the packets he suppressed, and I have looked into the whole squalid machinery of the thing, and I will lay it before the reader in its place. It is enough here to say that Kell was a man of debts and appetites who had long looked upon his ward's fortune as upon a well from which, given cunning and time, he might contrive to drink, and that my suit, honourable and open and offering the girl a station beyond his reach to meddle in, was the last thing in the world he desired for her. A duke cannot be managed. A duke's wife is beyond a guardian's little economies and creative accountings. Kell wanted for Helena a husband he could work with, or better, work through. And while I laboured abroad in ignorance, he set himself, patiently and wickedly, to persuade her that I had forgotten her, that my silence was the silence of a great man who had amused himself with a country heiress and thought better it upon reflection. He had my absence to help him, and my rank to make the tale plausible, and a young woman's pride to do the cruelest part of the work. For what proud and feeling girl, believing herself so used, would humble herself to write again into a silence that seemed to mock her? So it was that I came home in the second spring to find the ground gone from beneath my feet. I called at the house in town where I had last seen her. The knocker was off the door. I wrote to Kell. I had a cool, correct reply regretting that Miss Carew was much engaged with preparations of a private nature and could receive no callers. I did not at first understand. I am ashamed to say that for some days I nursed my own injury, believed, as she had been made to believe of me, that I had been trifled with, and let a bitter pride keep me from the very inquiry that might have saved us weeks. When at last I swallowed that pride and set myself to learn the truth I learned was this, that Miss Helena Carew was to be married, within the month, to a gentleman named Sir Lucius Damer. I had heard the name. Everyone had heard the name. Sir Lucius Damer was one of those men who move through the world, leaving an agreeable impression and an empty purse behind them wherever they have lodged. He was perhaps 40, well-made, well-spoken, with an easy address and a face that women called handsome and men called frank. He rode well, played deep, and owed money, I was to discover, in 3 counties and 2 kingdoms. Nothing was proved against him. That was ever his art, that nothing was ever proved. He had a knack of arriving in a neighbourhood a little ahead of his reputation, and departing a little ahead of his creditors, and of carrying with him always the letters and the manners of a gentleman. To the world he was Sir Lucius Damer, of an old if impoverished baronetcy, a man a trifle unlucky at cards but sound at heart. To me, from the first hour I heard his name spoken in connection with hers, he was a wrongness I could not name, and could not shake a coldness at the back of my neck, the animal's warning that the schooled mind is too proud to heed. I did not then know the half of what he was. I did not know, God forgive me, that I did not know it in time, that he was already a married man, that the vows he meant to swear to Helena were vows that could bind no one, that the whole shining edifice of the marriage was a fraud built to give a criminal the lawful seeming mastery of a fortune and of the woman who owned it. All that came later, and dearly. In those first days I knew only that the woman I loved was to be given to a man my every instinct abhorred, and that her grasping guardian had made the match, and that I had, by my own long silence, left the door standing open for it. I did what a man does. I went to her. It cost me more than I can well express to force my way, through servants and excuses, into the presence of a woman I had last held in a garden in Hampshire, and when I stood before her at last, in a cold morning room of Kell's country house with the wedding but 9 days off, I found that the hardest thing of all was to be met not with anger but with a dignified, wounded calm that was worse than any reproach. She had believed me faithless. She told me so, quietly, standing very straight by the window with her hands folded, and she told me that a woman does not undo in an hour the reasoning of a year, and that she was pledged now, and that whatever might once have been, it was too late for it. I spoke of the letters. I saw doubt cross her face one flicker, quickly mastered, and I saw, too, that she dared not let herself believe me, for to believe me was to know that she had been deceived into ruining her own life, and no soul can look on such a thing at a single glance and keep its feet. Kell came in before I could press the advantage. There were words. I was, in effect, put out of the house. I went. To my lasting shame, and for reasons of a pride I have since had long leisure to curse, I went telling myself I would gather proofs, that I would come again armed with the suppressed letters and the whole exposure of Kell's treachery, that I would not be turned away a second time. I told myself there was time. There is a particular cruelty in the phrase "there is time," and I have never since been able to hear it without a coldness in my blood. There was not time. Or rather, the little there was, I squandered in the slow gathering of evidence, in the pursuit of a lawyer and an old servant of the family who could swear to the interception of the letters, in the 1,000 deliberate steps of a man who means to do the thing thoroughly and lawfully and beyond dispute. I meant to arrive at that wedding not as a rejected suitor making a scene, but as the bearer of a truth that would break the match honestly and set her free. It was a fine intention. It was very nearly the death of both of us. For while I gathered my proofs like a careful man, Sir Lucius Damer, who was not a careful man but a swift and ruthless one, moved to secure his prize before any truth could reach her, and Kell, whose debts had by then grown pressing and whose collusion with Damer ran deeper than mere folly, hurried the whole business forward. The wedding, which had been set for a date that gave me margin, was without warning advanced. I learned of it too late, in fact, from a paragraph in a newspaper, read in my own library with the morning light falling across the page, informing the world that Sir Lucius Damer had that very day been knighted in marriage to Miss Helena Carew at the parish church near her guardian's seat, and that the happy pair were to breakfast at the house before setting out upon their wedding journey. I do not remember rising from my chair. I remember being in the stable yard shouting for a horse, and the faces of my people, and the pounding of my own blood. It is some 40 miles from Merriton to Kell's country house, across a difficult country of heath and river and bad road, and I had perhaps 3 hours if the breakfast ran long, and no certainty at all of what I could do when I came there, but that I would be there, that I would at the least stand up in that company and speak, and let the world make what it would of a duke who forbade the banns 9 days after they were sworn. I flung myself into the saddle and rode. I will not pretend I rode with any settled plan. I rode with a single word beating in me: too late, too late, too late, and against it the desperate insistence that it should not, must not be too late, that some door remained, that a marriage newly made might yet be undone, if only I could reach her before the man had her wholly in his hands and away. And under all of it, cold and certain and growing with every mile, was the knowledge of what manner of man now called her wife, not a fool, not a mere fortune hunter to be bought off, but something worse, something I had scented and could not prove. I did not know then how right that dread was. I only rode. I came to the house a little after noon, my horse near foundered, myself splashed to the shoulder and past all thought of ceremony, and I knew before I had crossed the threshold that something was wrong beyond even the wrongness I had braced myself against. There were servants upon the steps who should have been within. There was a carriage in the drive at an angle no coachman would have chosen. There was a woman weeping somewhere within the house, a high thin sound that carried out into the still summer air, and there was over the whole place that particular stillness behind uproar that hangs about a house where a disaster has just occurred and no one yet knows what to do. I gave my reins to a boy who took them without seeming to see me and went up the steps and into a hall where a dozen wedding guests stood about in their finery like people struck to stone. It was Kell's own sister who told me, or half told me, catching at my sleeve with a face gone grey and speaking in broken pieces that I had to fit together as she spoke. There had been the breakfast. There had been the toasts, the forced gaieties. The bride pale but composed at the head of the table, and then, before the covers were well removed, Sir Lucius had risen and announced, with every appearance of tender solicitude, that his wife was overcome, that the excitement had been too much for her delicate spirits, and that he would take her at once into the air and thence, without waiting upon the planned festivities, upon their journey, that all was arranged, that they would send word from the road, and Helena, the woman told me, her voice cracking, Helena had not wished to go. She had risen white to the lips and said something low, and there had been a moment, an ugly moment, when the whole table felt the wrongness of it, and then Damer had his arm about her, all smiling attention, and 2 of his own men were at the door. And she was out and into the carriage, and the carriage was moving before any soul present had gathered wit enough to ask by what right a bride was carried weeping from her own wedding breakfast within the hour of her marriage. They were gone, someone thought, or west. No one was sure. He had told 3 people 3 destinations. He had told the truth to none. I stood in that hall with the wedding guests staring and the woman weeping against my sleeve, and I felt the last warmth go out of the day, for I understood, all at once and entire, what the slower minds about me had not yet let themselves understand, that this was no bridegroom's tender impatience, but a snatching away. That a man does not carry his unwilling wife from her own table on a false pretext and scatter false roads behind him, unless he means her to be found by no one. That Helena was not gone upon a wedding journey but taken, spirited off into the power of a man I had mistrusted from the first breath of his name, towards some remote place chosen for its very remoteness, that he might make himself master of her person and her fortune where no friend, no kinsman, no law could easily come at him. She was in his hands. She had been in his hands perhaps an hour, and every one of these good people in their wedding clothes would presently go home and shake their heads and say it was a strange business, but no doubt it would come right, and do nothing, because there was nothing that any of them, bound by forms and doubts and the fear of scandal, would dare to do. I turned from the weeping woman and went back out onto the steps into the hard noon light, and I looked at the road down which that carriage had gone, and something in me that had been divided and doubting for a year went still and hard and certain. No one else would go after her. I saw that plainly. Kell would bluster and do nothing. The guests would disperse. The law would shrug and call it a husband's right. There was one man in England who knew the truth of what she was carried toward, and who would go, and who would not stop, whatever the cost to his name or his neck or the horse under him, and I was that man. I called for a fresh mount before I had well framed the thought in words. The chase that would end 40 miles on with a good horse dead beneath me, and my boots full of mire had already, in my heart, begun. A fresh horse is a thing quickly demanded and not quickly got. And in the interval that its saddling required, I did the only useful work that was mine to do in that stricken house. I set myself to learn where she had been taken, and I learned in the learning of it the whole black truth that I had until then only dreaded. I have observed that in a house overtaken by calamity there is always one person who knows more than the rest and is afraid to say it, and that such a person may be found by the man who has the wit to look past the loud and the weeping to the quiet figure standing apart. Mine stood at the turn of the servant's stair, a girl of perhaps 19 with a face swollen from crying and an apron twisted to a rag between her hands, and she was looking at me as a drowning creature looks at the one spar within its reach. She was Helena's own maid. Her name, I was to have cause to remember, was Susan Pike, and but for her I think I should be writing now a very different and far shorter history, or should not be writing at all. She drew me aside into a still room that smelt of dried lavender and spilt wine, and there, in a torrent she could no longer dam, she gave me what she had. Her mistress had known. That was the first and worst of it, and it went into me like a blade. Helena had known, or half known, that the thing was wrong, not the whole of it, but enough to have lain awake these 3 nights past in a terror she would confess to no one, save that this good frightened girl had heard her weeping through the wall and had gone to her. There had been a letter. A fortnight since, a stranger had come to the kitchen door asking for Miss Carew's woman, and had put into Susan's hand a paper folded small and sealed with a common wafer, and had gone away without giving his name. And Susan had carried it up, and her mistress had read it standing by the window, and had gone the colour of ash, and then very still. She had not shown it to her guardian. She had not, God help her, shown it to me, for she believed me faithless and gone. She had folded it away and gone on with the dreadful preparations, because she could see no road out of them and was too proud, and too much alone, to cry for a help she thought she had forfeited. Susan had the letter still. Her mistress had thrust it upon her in the last hour, in the flurry of the leaving, with a look and a whispered word, keep it, and if any comes asking honestly, give it. And Susan, not knowing friend from foe in all that smiling company, had kept it against her breast and given it to none. She gave it to me now. I have that paper yet. I keep it locked away, and I take it out but seldom, for the reading of it undoes me still. It was written in a hand I did not know, a clerk's careful hand, by one who dared not sign, and it was brief and terrible. It told Miss Carew, in the plain words of a man discharging a conscience at great risk to himself, that the gentleman she was about to marry was already a husband, that there lived, in a village upon the Welsh border, a woman who had been wedded to Sir Lucius Damer 11 years before under his own true name, and who lived yet, abandoned but undivorced and undead, that the writer had served that gentleman and had seen the register with his own eyes and could not carry the sin of his silence, and that the marriage she was pledged to was therefore no marriage at all, but a snare, and she was begged for the love of her soul to fly it while she might. There was more. There was a line I need not set down, touching what such a man designs by such a fraud, that a young woman reading it alone by a window might well go the colour of ash. And at the foot, where a name should have stood, there was only the phrase, "One who has done you a great wrong in serving him and cannot mend it but by this." I stood in that dim, sweet-smelling room with the thing shaking in my hand, and I felt the floor of the world drop away beneath me and reveal, below it, the true and hideous architecture of what had been done. It was not merely that a fortune hunter had got a rich girl to church. It was that a criminal, a bigamist under a stolen respectability, had gone through a form of marriage he knew to be void, precisely because he knew it to be void, because a false marriage that the world believes true gives a man every appearance of a husband's rights and none of a husband's bonds. Because as Helena's supposed husband he might take her money, her lands, her very body under colour of law, might carry her where he pleased and hold her how he pleased, and if ever she rebelled or the truth broke, might cast her off ruined and disgraced while he vanished with what he had bled from her, having in law been never married to her at all. She was not a wife. She was a prisoner who did not yet perhaps fully know she was a prisoner. Carried off within the hour of her false wedding toward some place got ready beforehand, chosen for its distance from every friend and every court, where a patient and ruthless man might make himself master of all she was, and had before the slow machinery of the law had so much as roused itself to ask a question, and every hour widened between her and any soul that might have helped her. I understood in that room that she was in danger not of her comfort or her happiness, but of her life and her honour together, and that the danger grew with every turning of the carriage wheels while I stood breathing lavender. I asked the girl where. She had crept near a door, it seemed, in the last confusion, and had heard a thing not meant for her Damer speaking low to one of his men, not the false roads he had scattered for the guests, but a real word, an order about horses to be waiting, and a name. The name was Thornhollow. She did not know it, I did. It was a house I'd heard spoken of once years before, in a very different connection, an old, half-ruined place upon the northern coast, standing above the sea at the end of a bad road in a bare country. A house that had belonged to a family gone to smash and had since passed through the hands of men who wanted a roof that no one visited and no one overlooked. Damer would have taken it, or borrowed it, or bought the use of it from some confederate. It was exactly and precisely the den that such a scheme required, remote, defensible, hard by the sea, and thus hard by escape should escape become needful, and a full 2 days' hard travelling to the north. That was where he meant to run her to earth. That was the destination behind the 3 false ones. I had it now, and I had the letter that proved the whole fraud, and I had, standing before me wringing her apron, the honest witness who could swear to how it came to her. And I understood that I held in my hands not merely the means to pursue, but the means, if I lived to use them, to break the man utterly and set her free before the law itself. But all of it was worth nothing, less than nothing, if I could not come to her before he had done what he had carried her off to do. I went to find Kell. I will not dwell long upon that interview, for it shames me even now to recall how near I came in that hall, to laying violent hands upon a man twice my years. I found him in his library with a glass of his own wine in his hand, and a look upon his face that told me the whole of his complicity before he had said a word. For it was not the face of a man whose ward has been snatched from him, but the face of a man calculating how a thing that has gone somewhat further than he intended may yet be turned to his profit. I put the letter before him, I watched him read it, and I watched him understand that I understood, and I saw the wine shake in the glass. He tried at the first. The high line that a guardian did his duty as he saw it, that Sir Lucius had come to him well recommended, that no man could have foreseen, and I let him run on a sentence or two, and then I told him, very quietly, for I found that my rage had gone past shouting into something colder and more dangerous, exactly what I knew, that he had intercepted my letters, that I could prove it, that he had sold his ward for the settling of his debts to a man he had not troubled to inquire into, because he had not wished to inquire, and that if any harm came to Helena Carew, he would answer for it to me and to the law as an accomplice to her ruin, and that no acreage of respectability would shelter him. He crumpled then. The bluster went out of him like air from a bladder and left a frightened, grasping, contemptible old man who began to whine of his own losses, of how Damer owed him money too, of how he had been deceived as much as any. I dare say there was even truth in some of it. A small villain is very often the dupe of a large one, and I have since come to believe that Kell knew Damer for a fortune hunter, but did not know him for a bigamist, and had sold Helena expecting to share in the plunder of her marriage, not dreaming that the marriage was a nothing and the plunder meant for one purse alone. It did not signify. Dupe or accomplice, he had opened the door, and he would do nothing now but wring his hands. I left him wringing them. I had learned all he could tell me, which was little, and I had a great deal of country to cross. The horse was ready. It was by then, I judged, above 2 hours since the carriage had gone, and the summer afternoon was already tilting westward, the light going long and golden across the park in that beautiful indifferent way of light that cares nothing for what men suffer beneath it. 2 hours' start, and a carriage that could not, upon those roads, make above 7 or 8 miles in the hour, against a single horseman who might, God and the roads permitting, make half as much again. The arithmetic of it stood clear and merciless in my mind. He had the start, I had the speed, and the greater endurance of one man riding light against a coach and 4 with a woman in it and a schedule of changes to keep, and I had the country in my head, for I had ridden and hunted the northern shires as a young man and knew, or half knew, the web of roads by which a carriage bound for that coast must go. There were not so many. A coach cannot go as the crow flies. It is the prisoner of the turnpike and the bridge and the passable ford. And if I thought clearly and chose rightly, I might cut across the cords of the arcs his wheels were bound to follow and gain upon him through night far faster than the mere difference of our paces would suggest, if I did not kill my horse first. If I did not, in the dark, upon a strange road, choose wrong. I put these ifs behind me. I took the letter, sealed now in oiled silk against the weather and buttoned against my heart. I took what money was in the house and a brace of pistols from Kell's own hall, which I did not scruple to make him lend me. I told Susan Pike to keep herself safe and to hold her tongue, and to trust the first of my own people that came, for I would send. And I mounted, and I turned the horse's head to the north. And I rode out of that accursed house into the westering light upon the longest journey of my life. The first hours of it were hard riding upon good road, and they left too much of my mind free, and my mind, riderless, went where it had been aching to go since I first read that letter. Back over the whole of it, back over every step of the road that had led her to that carriage, and every step of it was a step I might have trod otherwise. That is the particular torment of the man who comes too late, that he cannot ride, without riding also through the country of his own fault, and that the two roads run side by side the whole way. I thought of Hampshire, and the wet autumn, and the grave warm face turned up to mine in a garden, and how sure I had been, God forgive me, how easily and arrogantly sure that a thing so plainly meant would keep. I thought of my going abroad, and told myself again, as I had told myself 100 times, that I could not in honour have refused my brother, and knew, as I had come to know, that the honour was real but that the leisureliness was mine, that I had gone as a man goes who believes the best of the world owes him patience, and had written my letters and thought them enough, and had not troubled to make certain not once in 3 months that a single one had reached her hand. A man does not lose what he guards. I had not guarded. I had left the field and left it to a Kell and a Damer, and they had done with it what such men do. And I thought of the letters themselves, lying broken sealed in a guardian's drawer, and of the silence they made, and of what that silence had done to a proud and lonely girl who had every reason given to believe herself trifled with by a great man who had gone away. I did not blame her. I have never for one instant blamed her. I saw riding, with a clarity that the jolting dark seemed only to sharpen, exactly how it must have been for her the first letter looked for and not come, and the second, and the excuses her own generous heart would make for me growing thinner with each grey morning, and beside her all the while the patient poisonous voice of her guardian, and beyond him the pleasant, frank-faced attentions of a man who was there, constant. When I was a name upon no letter and a promise that seemed to have blown away, I had not been trifled with, and neither had she. We had both of us been worked upon, cunningly, by men who understood that the surest way to part two proud people is to let each believe the other has done the parting. And I had helped them. I had helped them with my absence, and helped them again with my pride, that morning in the cold room when I turned on my heel to go and gather my proofs like a careful man, and left her one more time to Dema, telling myself there was time. The horse ran on beneath me, and the light died out of the west behind the hills, and I let it die, and set my face into the gathering dark of the north and rode. Night came down over that country the way a lid comes down over a box. The good road gave way at last to a worse, and the golden fields to black hedgerows and blacker woods, and the friendly summer dusk to a real and rising dark, which a man could see little but the pale ghost of the way unrolling before his horse's ears, and could hear little but the horse's breath, and the drum of its hooves, and once, far off, the barking of a dog at some farm I never saw. I did not slacken. I could not. Every check of the pace was a gift of yards to the man ahead, and I had begun by now to hate him with a cold completeness that steadied rather than shook me. Somewhere north and east of me, upon another and slower road, a carriage was running through this same dark, and in it, alive, afraid, and infinitely brave, for I never once, through all of it, doubted her courage, was the woman I had loved for 3 years and failed for 1. She did not know I was coming. She had no reason in the world to think that any soul in England knew her peril or would stir to end it. She believed herself, I make no doubt, alone as a woman can be alone, carried away into the dark by a smiling stranger toward a house above the sea. She was wrong. For the first time in a wretched year I was doing, instead of calculating, and whatever waited at the end of that road at Thornhallow, above the cold northern water, it would have to be gone through by both of us together, for I did not mean to stop while the horse could stand, nor after. If it came to that, the night swallowed the last grey light behind me. Far ahead, unseen, the road ran on to the coast, and I rode into the dark upon the trail of Sir Lucius Damer, with the whole of what remained to me bent upon overtaking him before the morning, and no more certainty of reaching her in time than I had had of anything, save the certainty of my own resolve. The first change of horses I made at a posting in some 25 miles north of Kelsgate, in a village whose name I never asked, and it taught me at once the shape of the night that was to come. I had ridden the good grey Kell had lent me until it was blown and stumbling, and I clattered into the yard shouting for the ostler before I was well down from the saddle, and there learned my first lesson in the cruel commerce of a chase, that a man in a desperate hurry pays double and is served slowly, for the very extremity of his need marks him as one who may be squeezed. The landlord came out yawning and unwilling, having plainly been roused from his own bed, and looked at my mud and my sweating horse and my face, and named a price for a fresh beast that would have bought the animal outright in an honest market. I paid it without a word. I had learned in the still room that time was the only coin that signified, and that every other kind of money was to be flung away like water in the buying of it, and I flung it. But even so the saddling took its quarter of an hour, and I stood in the reeking lantern light of that yard, and felt each minute go by me like a living thing escaping, and thought of the carriage running on ahead through the dark with no need to stop, for Damer, curse him, had laid his changes beforehand, had fresh teams standing ready at posts of his own choosing, and went through the night like a man drawing his hand along a rope already stretched, while I must find my rope afresh at every mile. I have set myself, in the writing of this history, to give the night its due, for no man who has not ridden such a night can well conceive how long a single darkness may be made to hold. There were, I think, above 140 miles of it between me and the coast, and I rode them as a man crosses a frozen river, feeling for the sound footing and never sure of it, driven the whole way by the knowledge of what ran beneath. The moon came up late and thin behind a scud of cloud, and gave me light enough to hate, for it showed me the road only well enough to show me how the road divided, and it divided cruelly and often. At every fork I must halt, and think and wager. I knew the country in the large, as a hunting man knows it, by its rivers and its market towns and the lie of its hills. I did not know it in the small, in the particular business of which lane out of a sleeping hamlet led on to the north, and which curled back upon itself to die in a farmyard. And twice in those first hours I chose wrong and lost the second time. The better part of an hour before a shift in the run of a stream told me I had been going east when I should have gone north, and I turned and rode back over my own error with my heart like a stone. It was afterward, from her own lips, in the safe firelit years that were so long in coming, that I learned how it had been with her through those same hours. And I will set it here, beside my own writing, for the two were braided together through that night, whether either of us knew it or no. And to tell the one without the other is to tell but half a truth. She had gone into the carriage, she told me, in a kind of frozen composure, having resolved in that last hour at her guardian's house that if she could not escape the thing she would at the least not give the man the satisfaction of her fear. She had read the letter. She knew, or more than half knew, that the smiling gentleman handing her up into the coach was no husband, but a snare with a man inside it, and she had made herself, in the space of a morning, into a creature of watchfulness and calculation, hiding her whole soul behind a face of tired bridal quiet, and had begun from the first mile to do the only work left to her, which was the work of delay, for she had understood, she said, without being told, the very thing that I had reasoned out in the still room, that his whole design depended upon haste, upon getting her fast beyond rescue before the truth could rouse itself, and that therefore whatever slowed him, however little, was her friend and his enemy, and that a woman with no weapon but her wits might yet fight a rearguard with the minutes. So she fought it. She complained prettily and helplessly of the jolting, and begged that they might go more gently, for her head ached. And Dama, who could not yet afford to let the mask slip, for they were still in country where a screaming woman might be heard and questioned, bade the coachman ease the pace, and lost a mile. She dropped a glove, and could not be easy until it was found, and made them search for it upon a darkening verge while the horses stamped. She discovered, at one of the changes, that a strap of her small baggage had come loose and must be seen to, and stood by watching the ostlers with an air of gentle helplessness, while the man Dama had set to hurry them grew red about the neck. Each of these was a little thing, a trifle, a matter of moments, but she had reasoned that a chase is won and lost in moments, that the road to the coast was made of thousands of them, and that a woman who could steal back even a few from her captor's account was not, whatever he believed, entirely in his power. She grew faint at a certain posting-house where they changed, and must have the window down and a little water, and took a great while over the drinking of it, watching all the while, she told me, the faces in the yard, wondering which if any might be trusted with a word, and finding none. For the men were all his or bought or indifferent, and the one honest-looking woman she saw was gone before she could catch her eye. She lost him in the course of that long day and the night that followed it, perhaps 2 hours by such arts, and she knew, even as she spun them, that 2 hours were not enough, that he was carrying her north faster than she could unspin the miles. But she did not stop, and she did not weep before him, and she told me that the thing which kept her to it, absurd as it seemed to her even then, was a refusal she could not have explained, a flat, deep, unreasoning refusal to believe herself wholly abandoned, as though somewhere behind her in the dark, against all the evidence of a silent year, some help were coming that she had no right to expect. I have thought often since upon that. I do not know by what road the heart comes at such knowledge. I know only that she was right, and that I was on the road behind her, killing horses to reach her, at the very hours when she sat telling herself, without reason, that I might be. Toward the middle of that night the weather, which had been only sullen, turned against me in earnest. The scudding cloud thickened and shut out my thin moon altogether, and then it began to rain, not the soft rain of the south, but a hard, slanting, northern rain driven on a wind that came, I could feel, off the far sea toward which we both were bound, and it made of the road a running trouble of black water and the darkness a wall. I bent my head to it and rode. There is a stretch of that journey I can scarcely give account of. So nearly did the cold and the wet and the sleeplessness beat me down into a kind of walking dream in the saddle, in which the drumming of the hooves and the drumming of the rain became one sound, and the one clear thing in all the world was the need to go on. I changed horses twice more in that streaming dark, at prices I did not haggle and inns I could not now find again, and each time the getting a fresh beast was slower and harder, for the hour was against me, and men do not love to be turned out of bed into a storm for a stranger's convenience. And each time I stood in the delay and felt her carried further off, and it was in the worst of that weather that I came to the river. I had known there was a river to cross, I had counted upon a certain bridge, and I came down to it in the black rain to find the water up and roaring over its meadows, a broad pale violence in the dark, where quiet water should have been, and the bridge I could just make it out with its near arch standing, but its footing gnawed at and undermined by the flood, and a countryman's cart drawn crosswise at the head of it, and a lantern and two men who cried to me through the rain that no man might cross there tonight, that the bridge was condemned, that the ford 3 miles down was the only way, and God help me if I tried it in this water. 3 miles down and 3 miles back was 6 miles and the better part of an hour, and I stood my trembling horse at the lip of that ruined bridge and looked at the black arch and the roaring flood, and did, I confess it, weigh for one wild instant the crossing of it. And it was one of the two men with the lantern who saved me from that folly, and I have since thought, saved the whole enterprise. He was a farmer named, as I later has to record it with gratitude, John Sedgley, and he had come out into the storm with his man to guard the broken bridge lest some benighted traveller be drowned in the dark upon it. And something in my face, or in the desperation of a gentleman abroad and alone on such a night, moved him. He asked me, bluntly, what was my haste, and for I had learned already that guarded silence bought me nothing, and that the plain truth, told to the right man, might buy me everything told him. I told him a woman had been carried off by a villain against her will, and that I rode to save her, and that every minute was her peril. He looked me a moment in the lantern light with the rain running off both our hats, and then he did a thing I have never forgotten. He said there was a way across his own land, a farm track and a stone clapper bridge over the river's upper narrows that no coach could use but a single horse might, and that it would set me on the northern road 2 miles above the ford and save me the whole of the loop, and he lit me to it himself, walking at my stirrup with the lantern through his own soaking fields, and put me across the narrow stones, and pointed me my way into the dark, and would take nothing for it. I have since made that man's fortune, so far as one man may make another's. It was the cheapest money I ever laid out, and the best, and I set it down here that his name may stand in this account beside the greater names, for the saving of Helena Carew was done by many hands that night, and his was not the least of them. Her night, meanwhile, had come to its own crisis, though of a slower and more dreadful kind than mine. They had reached, in the small hours, the lonely house Thornhallow itself, above the sea, at the end of its bad road in its bare country, and there, she told me, the last of the mask came off. For they were come now to the place he had chosen precisely because in it no scream would be heard and no door knocked upon, and he no longer troubled to be gentle. He had been, through the journey, by turns the ardent bridegroom and the impatient master, and she had held both off. The one with a cool bridal reserve that a watching servant might take for modesty, and the other with a fixed and steady courtesy that gave him no purchase. But in the cold stone hall of that ruined house, with his own men lounging at the doors and the sea sounding somewhere below in the dark, he put it to her plainly at last that she was his wife and had best be a wife in earnest, and she, standing very straight and very white before him with the whole truth of the letter locked behind her teeth, played then the last and boldest card that was left in her hand. She did not accuse him. That, she had reasoned coldly through the long miles, would be to warn him that the game was known and to spur his haste. Instead, she pleaded fatigue and illness, and the sacred exhaustion of a bride, and asked as a woman broken and obedient might ask only for the night, only for a room and a door and a few hours' rest before she took up her duty, and she asked it so meekly and so cleverly that his own vanity betrayed him into granting it, for it pleased him to believe her cowed, and it cost him, he thought, but a handful of hours out of a lifetime of possession. He gave her the night. He set a woman of his to watch her door and a man below, and he went off to his wine well satisfied, and Helena, alone at last in a bare cold chamber high in that house with the sea under her window, did not sleep at all. but sat through the whole of the remaining dark fully clothed upon the edge of bed, listening and thinking and refusing still, with that same unreasoning steadfastness, to believe the morning would find her without hope. She had bought herself the night. She did not know whether the night would be long enough. She knew only, she told me, that she would meet whatever came in it upon her feet, and that she had rather die at that high window above the cold water than be made the property of the man below by any patience of her own. I came up out of the last of the low country into the bare northern hills in the grey hour before the dawn, upon a horse that was dying under me as I rode. It was a raw-boned bay I had got at my final change, a willing, generous creature that had given me everything through the last black hours. And somewhere in that grey ascent I felt it begin to great heart labouring, the gallant stride shortening and roughening, the breath tearing, and I knew, with a grief that surprised me by its sharpness in the midst of all my other griefs, that I was riding a good horse into the ground and could not spare it, that there was no mercy left in me to give it, for all my mercy was spent upon one object, and this brave beast must be poured out like the rest. Carried me over the top of the last hill and a half-mile down the seaward side, and then it foundered under me in earnest, going down at last with a groan into the wet heather at the road's edge, and I came off it and stood a moment with my hand upon its heaving neck in the cold wind. And then I left it. I had to leave it, and went on afoot down that bad road toward the sea, running and stumbling in my heavy boots, with the pistols dragging at me and the breath sawing in my own chest, for I was by then near as spent as the horse. I have thought since, in shame and in ingratitude both, of that abandoned beast lying in the heather. I sent men back for it after, and it lived, and I kept it in idleness and honour to the end of its days, for it had done a thing that morning that no money could have bought, and that I had no right to ask. But in the moment I did not look back at it. I could not. Everything in me that could still move was drawn forward and downward toward the sea and the black gables and the single burning window, and I gave the dying horse behind me not one backward glance. And that too is a thing I had to make my peace with. And then the road turned, and the last rag of cloud tore off the face of the coming dawn, and I saw it. Below me, perhaps a mile on, where the bare land ran out and dropped to a grey and heaving sea, stood a huddle of black gables against the paling eastern old high house at the end of everything, with the water sounding cold beyond it, and a single window, near the top, showing the one small yellow light in all that dark country. Thornhallow. I stopped where I stood upon the hill, with the wind off the sea in my face, and my heart going like the hooves that had brought me there. And I looked down at that lonely house with its one lit window, behind which, alive and waking and holding her enemy off by courage through the last of the dark, was the woman I had crossed a country in a night to reach. And I knew that she was there, and I knew that he was there, and I knew that between the saving of her and the losing of her there now lay only the running of that last grey mile, and whatever waited at the foot of it. The light in the window did not move, neither, for one held breath, did I. Then I went down the hill toward the house, toward her, toward the thing that must be done, with the dawn coming up cold and clear behind me over the hills I had ridden through the night. And what was done there at Thornhallow, in that first light above the sea, I must tell in its place. The last grey mile of that descent I ran, and I will not pretend to any grace in the running of it, for I was a man near the end of his strength, going downhill in heavy boots toward the thing he had crossed a country to do. And I stumbled twice upon the loose stones of the bad road, and once went down a knee and rose again with the sea wind tearing the breath out of me. I had wit enough left, even in that extremity, not to come straight up the front of the house like a herald, for I had learned through the night the whole shape of the man I hunted, and I knew that Damer did not sleep unguarded, and that a duke shouting at a barred door in the dawn would only give the villain time to do quickly, and in a corner the thing he had brought her all this way to do at leisure. So I checked myself in the last of the shadow under the seaward wall, where the ground fell away to the water, and the old house sat upon its rock with the tide sounding below, and I went along the wall with my back to the cold stone, and both my pistols drawn, looking for the way in that such a house always keeps against its own master's knowledge. I found it in a scullery door standing off the latch, and I found, beyond it, my first friend in that evil place. There was a woman in the low kitchen, an old serving woman with a hard-bitten face and a candle. who had risen before her betters to rake the fire, and she turned when the door breathed open and saw me come in out of the dawn with the pistols in my hands and the mud of 100 miles upon me, and she did not scream. I have thanked God since for that steadiness in her. Another woman would have cried out and undone us all. She stood with the candle shaking in her hand and looked at my face a long moment, and what she read there I cannot say, but she set the candle down upon the board very softly, and she said, in a low country voice, "You'll be come for the young lady." It was not a question. I told her, low, that I was, and that I meant the young lady no harm on my life, but only her deliverance, and that the man who had brought her was no husband, but a felon with a wife already living, and I saw the old woman's mouth go thin and grim, and she nodded once as though a thing long suspected had at last been named aloud. She had not liked the business. She told me in a few hard whispers, there was no woman under that roof had liked it. For they had all of them seen how the bride went white and silent, and how the gentleman's smiling went cold the moment a door was shut. And she told me, quick and clear, the thing I most needed to know, which was the stair, and the chamber at the head of it, and that Damer's own man Pruitt slept across the passage below, and that Damer himself was but now risen and gone up, not a quarter hour since, in no gentle humour, having drunk the night through and waited on his patience long enough. That last struck me like a spur. I did not stay for more. I left the old woman to her fire, and I went up the dark back stair 3 treads, at a stride with my heart in my throat, for I understood from her that the knight's grace Helena had so cleverly begged herself was run out, and that the reckoning she had held off until the dawn was even then being demanded of her at the top of that house. I came out into a bare panelled passage with the cold grey light, just entering it by a single seaward window, and I heard them before I saw his voice first. Low and thick and no longer troubling to be sweet, saying something I did not catch the words of but caught the whole vile meaning of, the voice of a man done with pretending, and then her voice, and the sound of it went through me like a blade, for it was not weeping, it was not pleading. It was Helena Carew's voice raised clear and steady and full of a cold contempt, telling him that he might call her wife until the sky fell, but that she knew him now for what he was and would die sooner than own it. There was the sound of a chair going over. I did not knock. I put my shoulder and the whole ruin of my remaining strength against that door, and it burst inward off its poor bolt, and I came into the room. I have carried the picture of it in my mind these many years and shall carry it to my grave. She stood backed against the far wall beneath the high window through which the grey sea light came, in the crushed and travel-stained silk that had been meant for a bride, her hair fallen and her face white as the wall behind her, and her hand was closed upon a heavy candlestick of pewter which she had plainly snatched up and meant to use, holding it not like a woman fainting, but like a creature at bay that will sell itself dear, and between me and her, turned now toward the broken door with his handsome face all disordered by drink and fury, and the ugliness underneath at last come up through it, stood Sir Lucius Damer. For one instant we 3 were held as figures in a picture. Then he flung his hand toward his coat, where I did not doubt a pistol lay, and I said, and I heard my own voice come out of me low and terrible and quite steady, which surprised me, "Touch it and you are a dead man, Damer. I have ridden all night for the pleasure of it," and he did not touch it. He was quick, though, I will grant the wretch that. In the space of 3 breaths he had gathered up the whole scattered wreck of his composure and put on again, like a man snatching up a dropped mask, the smooth insolent ease that had served him all his life. He straightened his coat. He looked at me down the length of the room as though I were the intruder upon some private lawful scene, and he said, with a coolness that in another cause I might have admired, that he knew me, that I was Merriton, that I had broken like a footpad into the bridal chamber of a gentleman and his wedded wife, and had best withdraw before I made myself a byword in every drawing-room in England. He leaned upon that word wife. He turned it toward Helena as a man turns a key, and I saw, in the flinch that crossed her white face at the word, that here was the true engine of his power over her, not the bolted door, not the man across the passage, but the thing he could make the world believe, and understood in that instant that to save her body from this room was but the half of it, and that the other half, the harder half, was to be fought for the meaning of that single word, and would not be finished here, and might not be finished for a very long while. So I answered him before her, and I chose my words as a man lays cannon. I told him I named him bigamist. I told him, and I watched her face while I told it, that there was living at that hour in the town of Bristol, in a house I could describe and before witnesses I could summon, a woman married to Lucius Damer these 6 years by lines no court in the kingdom would disallow, and that every syllable he had spoken over Helena Carew in that hired travesty of a wedding was so much air, a fraud, a felony, a thing not merely wicked, but void, that she was no more his wife than the old woman raking the fire below, that she had never for one instant been his wife, that the law that he leaned upon as his shield was in truth the sword that should hang him. I told him I had the proofs of it under my hand, and Kell's own confession to the manner of the snare, and that I had not ridden through the night to fight him, but to arrest him, and that there was a magistrate 3 hours behind me on the road with a parish officer at his side, coming to this house, for I had roused them as I passed and set them on. Some of that was true, and some was the truth a little before its time, but I said it all in the same iron voice. And I had the satisfaction, the deep and savage satisfaction, of watching the charming mask I'd so hated crack across and fall, and the thing beneath it look out at me, not a bold villain at the last, but a cheat who sees his account called in, with fear coming up grey behind his eyes. And I had a greater satisfaction than that, which was to see the word he had used to wound her turned in the air and given back to her whole. I looked past him to where she stood with the candlestick still gripped in her hand, and I said to her, more gently than I had said anything in many hours, "You are not his wife, Miss Carew. You never were. Whatever this house has seen, you go out of it as free and as clean as you came into the world, and I will prove it before all England, though it take me the rest of my life. I have never in my days seen a human face do what hers did then." She did not weep. I think she had gone past the country where weeping lives, but something went out of her, some rigid, dreadful holding that had kept her upon her feet through a night of terror, and something came into her in its place. And she looked at me across that squalid room as though I were a thing risen up out of the sea, and her lips moved and made my name not my title, my name, and I knew that whatever else the world should do to us, that look had passed between us and could not be unmade. Damer chose that moment to go for the pistol after all. Perhaps he saw the two of us so caught in one another that he thought me off my guard. Perhaps a cornered man simply cannot help himself. His hand darted into his coat, and I was across the floor upon him before the thing was half drawn, and I struck it from his grip with the barrel of my own, and it went spinning under the bed and fired itself against the wainscot with a great flat crack that filled the little room with smoke and sent the ball harmlessly into the panelling, and then we closed and grappled. And it was a short, brutal business and no display of arms. He was softer than his life had promised, and I, spent as I was, had behind me the strength of a whole night's fury. I bore him back and down, and I got my knee upon him and the muzzle of my pistol beneath his jaw, and I held him so, both of us gasping, while below in the house a great confusion of running feet and shouting broke out. It was, I found after, his man Pruitt roused by the shot and coming up the stair. And it was the old serving woman and 2 of the frightened maids who met that man upon the stair with a raised fire iron and their own hard country loyalty, and hindered him the vital minute another debt I could never repay in coin, and in that minute the thing was decided. For I had Damer helpless under my hand, and Helena had come from her wall to my side, quick and steady, and taken up the fallen candlestick again to stand at my back against the door. I did not kill him. I have gone back over that morning many times, and I do not think I was ever truly in danger of it, though he lay under my knee and my whole body cried out for it, and no jury in England would have hanged me. But I had told her he should answer to the law and not to me. And I found I wished her to see that a promise made to her in that room was a thing I would keep, though I trembled with the wanting of its opposite. So I did not kill him. I dragged him up by the collar instead, and I put him from me against the wall, and I stood between him and her with the pistol level, and I told him he might go. I told him the magistrate was coming, and that if he had any wit left under his fright he would be gone out of that house and off that coast, and out of the reach of English law before the sun was well up. For I would not soil this rescue with his blood, but neither would I lift a hand to keep him for the rope if he chose to run to it. It was, I have since been told by graver men than I, a folly and a weakness to let him go, and so in the strict account it was. But I had her at my side, white and swaying and near the end of her endurance, and I wanted her out of that house and into the clean air more than I wanted his neck, and I made the bargain a tired man makes and have paid for it since. He went. But he did not go as a beaten man goes, in silence. That was not in him. He gathered himself at the door with the old insolence flickering up through his fear like a flame over wet wood, and he looked from her to me and back again, and he said I set the words down exactly. For they were to hang over the months that followed like a cloud, he said. Rescue her, then, Merriton, and welcome. You have got yourself a bride the whole world has watched carried off and shut a night in another man's house. Marry her and be pointed at. Leave her and let her rot. It is all one to me. I have had the printing of this tale already, and you will not overtake it. There is not a mother in London will receive her, nor a court will settle her father's money on a woman whose very wedlock is in question, until you have unpicked in 5 years' law what I have sewn up in a season. Think on it, your grace, when you lie awake. And he made her a bow, a deep and mocking bow, the vilest thing I ever saw done, and then he was gone down the stair, and I heard, a little after, the beat of a horse going away hard along the cliff road to the north, and I let him go. Then there was only the two of us, and the grey light strengthening in the cold room, and the smoke of the pistol thinning away toward the broken window, and the sea sounding below. I turned to her. All that I had carried through the night, everything I had meant, in the long dark hours in the saddle, to say to her if God should let me reach her living rose up in me and stopped in my throat, for there is no speech made for such a moment. She stood before me swaying with weariness in her ruined bridal silk, and she had held herself like iron before her enemy and before his man and through the whole of that dreadful night, and now that the enemy was gone and only her deliverer stood before her, I saw the iron begin at last to fail. She looked up at me. She said in a voice gone suddenly small and unsteady after all its courage, "You came." 2 words only, but the whole silent year that had lain between us was in them, and all the thwarted love that neither of us had ever been let to speak. And I put out my hands, and she came the one step into them, and I held her, only held her, with her face against my muddy coat and my arms about her, and neither of us said another word, for there were no words yet that would bear the weight of it. She did not weep even then. I think she was too far spent for tears. She only stood within my arms and shook, a fine deep shaking she could not master, and I felt through it the whole of what had been done to her, and the whole of what had been so nearly done. And I held her the tighter and swore inside myself a great oath I have kept, but even in that moment, with her safe against my heart at the very summit of all my hopes, I felt the ground move under us, and knew that we stood not at an ending but upon the lip of something new and dark. For she stirred against me after a little, and I felt her stiffen, and she drew herself a small way back within my arms and looked up at me with a new thing come into her white face, not fear of Damon now, for he was gone, but a different and a colder dread, the dread of one who has heard, even in the midst of her rescue, exactly what her rescuer's enemy said as he went. "He is right," she said very low, and I saw the pride I so loved and was so to suffer from come up steady behind her eyes even as she swayed on her feet. "Whatever you have proved, whatever the truth of it, I am a woman carried off from her own wedding breakfast and kept a night in this house, and the world will not stay to hear the truth. You must not." And there she stopped and would not finish it, and put her hand against my chest as though to set a distance there she had not the strength yet to make. And I, holding her, feeling her tremble and hearing the first note of that ruinous resolve, knew that I had ridden through a night to pull her out of one man's power only to find her stepping, before my eyes, into the graver danger of her own high heart. And I gathered her up without another word and carried her down out of that house of shame into the cold clean light of the risen sun, and got her away and told myself the worst was behind us. I was wrong. The worst was all before. The journey back from that coast was not the triumph I had pictured through the black hours of the ride out. I had gone to her across a country in one night with murder in my heart and a single fixed idea that if I could but reach her living all the rest would follow of itself, and I had reached her living. and had her now beside me in a hired chaise with a borrowed cloak about her and her hand cold in mine, and understood with every mile that turned beneath the wheels that the reaching had been the easy part, and that the country I must now cross was one no horse could carry me over. She slept a little against my shoulder from pure exhaustion, and woke, and would not speak of what had passed, and looked out at the hedgerows with a stillness that frightened me more than any weeping could have done. And once, when I pressed her hand and said some poor foolish tender thing, she turned to me a face so composed and so remote that I felt the first true cold of what was coming, and held my tongue, and let the miles run out in silence. For the thing Dama had flung over his shoulder as he went was no idle malice. He had told me he had had the printing of the tale already, and he had told me true. He had not ridden hard along that cliff road for nothing in the days he had held her. He had used the time as such a man uses everything, and the story had gone up the road to London before ever I came down it, dressed in his colours and not in mine. It reached the town, I found, in the shape most fatal to her. Not that Miss Helena Carew, a great heiress, had been torn by force from her own wedding breakfast, and carried off by a villain and shut a night in his house against every cry and struggle she could make. That tale, which was the truth, might have raised a county to her defence, but the other tale, the sly one, the one built to be believed by people who wished to believe it, that the Carew heiress had run off in the middle of her own nuptials with Sir Lucius Dama, that there had been an understanding between them, that she was whatever was now given out, his wife-in-law, and in fact, and had gone to him willingly, and that the Duke of Merriton, jilted and made a fool of before the whole of society, had ridden after in a passion to snatch back a woman who had chosen another man over him. It was a masterpiece of its wicked kind, for it took every fact that was in my favour and turned it to a ruin, and it left her, in the mouths of the drawing-rooms, neither an injured innocent nor an honest wife, but the worst thing the world can make of a woman, a creature who had been in two men's keeping in the space of a single day, and could be certainly claimed by neither. I have lived among these people all my life, and I had never, until that season, truly seen the machine of them at work upon they had decided to destroy. It does not shout. That is the horror of it. It is a very quiet engine. A card is not returned, an invitation promised does not come, and when one calls to inquire, the lady is not at home, though her carriage stands in the street. A woman who has kissed Helena on both cheeks 100 times inclines her head 1/8 of an inch in the park, and looks through her to the trees beyond. The great doors that had stood open to a Carew from her cradle did not slam, nothing so honest as a slam. They simply, one after another, all down the long streets of the town, were found upon inquiry to be shut, and no hand could be pointed to as the hand that had shut them. I called everywhere a duke may call, and traded upon a name that has opened most things in England for 400 years, and I felt it, for the first time in my life, not open. They would receive me. Of course they would receive me. I was Merriton, and I was a man, and the same fault that damns a woman forever is in a man a 9 days' gallantry. But they would receive me alone. They would not have her. Behind every civil face I read the same cold sentence: marry her if your grace is full enough, and we are sorry for you, and she shall never sit in any drawing-room of ours again while she lives. And the money, which I had thought at least was hers past any man's touching, proved not to be past Dama's. This was the last vengeance and the cunningest, and I did not understand the whole reach of it until I had sat 2 mornings with grave men of law in a chamber in the Temple, and heard it laid out. Her father's fortune was settled, as such fortunes are, with 100 careful provisions, and among them was the common one that made her marriage the gate through which the great bulk of it must pass to her. Now Dama had gone through a form of marriage with her, a real clergyman, a real church procured by fraud, a real register signed, and that marriage, being bigamous on his side, his first wife living, was void utterly, and nothing in law, as I had told her in that dreadful room. But void is a word easy to say and cruel hard to prove, and Dama, from whatever hole he had run to, had set his own lawyers on, and they had entered on his behalf a claim and a caveat, that the first marriage he was charged with was itself no true marriage, that the woman called his first wife was no wife but something less, that until the Crown or the Church should establish otherwise, his marriage to Miss Carew stood, and he stood as her husband, and her husband's hand must lie upon her fortune. It was a lie built upon a lie, and I did not doubt for one instant it would fall in the end. But the men of law who did not deal in the end told me plainly that it would not fall in a season, nor in a year, nor perhaps in 5. That Damer had contrived to knot the 2 marriages together, so that neither could be cut without the other, that the proof of his first wedding, the register, the witnesses, the woman herself was scattered God and where, and must be run down one thread at a time, and that until it was found and brought into a court and sworn to, Helena Carew was, in the eye of the law, a married woman whose marriage was merely doubted, and could no more wed me than she could fly, and her fortune lay frozen between the 2 claims like a thing caught in winter ice. He had reached out of the dark and shut his hand upon the 2 things that were hers, her name and her portion, and I could not for all my rank and all my will pry that dead hand loose until I had found what he had taken such pains to hide. I tell these things in their order, coldly, because that is how they came to me, one cold blow after another in the space of a fortnight, but I would not have the reader think I bore them coldly. I did not. I raged. I spent money like water and set men riding on every road he might have taken. And I stood over lawyers till they were sick of my face, and I called out, very nearly, a man at my club who let fall a smiling word about the affair within my hearing. It was Helena's own steadiness, coming to me second-hand, that stayed my hand from that last folly. For through it all, the strangest and the bitterest thing, she would not let me fight for her in the one way my whole heart was set upon. She would not let me marry her. I had gone to her the 3rd day after our return, to the house of the one old cousin who had taken her in, for even her guardian had failed her here, and that is a thing I must set down to his shame. Mr. Barnaby Kell, who had schemed and grasped after her fortune all her life, and would have sold her to Damer's suit had it served him, found now that the fortune was frozen and the name was tainted, and there was nothing more to be squeezed from either, and he did what such men do. He grew prudent. He gave it out that he had been himself deceived, poor honest man, that he washed his hands of a business that had brought disgrace upon his blameless house, that he could not be expected to shelter under his roof a ward whose conduct he did not say what of her conduct. He let the silence say it had grieved him past bearing. He shut his door on her along with all the rest, and kept, I have no doubt, a sharp eye on such of her money as passed through his fingers, and washed those fingers in public of the whole affair. So it was a distant, disapproving cousin, a poor gentlewoman with more heart than means, who gave Helena room, and it was in the small cold parlour of that house, with the fire built low to save coals, that I asked her to be my wife, and was refused. I had thought, God forgive my simplicity, that it would be the one bright hour in a black time. I came to her with the whole thing settled in my own mind, the licence I would get, the quiet church, the marriage that should silence every tongue by the mere fact of a duchess' coronet set upon her head. For I reasoned, like a man who has never wanted for anything, that the world which had shut its doors would fling them wide again fast enough before the Duchess of Merriton, and that my rank, which could not save her as a single woman, would armour her past all their malice as my wife. I laid it before her sitting there in her borrowed black, and I told her that I did not care one straw for the whole braying pack of them, that I had loved her before ever this began, and loved her for all she had borne, and that she had only to say the word and I would have her out of that cold house and safe under my name within the week. And she heard me out to the end, very quiet, with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the poor fire, and when I had done she raised her eyes to me and said no. I will not soon forget how she looked, nor what she said, for she said it with a gentleness that was worse to bear than any anger. She told me first that she loved me. She had never said it before, we had never in the whole thwarted year been let to say it, and she chose that moment, of all moments, to say it plainly, and I think she did it deliberately, so that I should know past any doubt that what followed came not from coldness, but from the very opposite. She loved me, she said. She believed I loved her, and it was because of that, and not in despite of it, that she would not marry me. Would I hear her, and not break in? For she had to say it all at once, or she would not be able to say it at all. And then she laid it out before me as clear-eyed and as pitiless with herself as any of those lawyers had been with the case, and every word she spoke out to be the harder to answer, because I could not honestly call it false. You think, she said, that your name will cover me. It will not. It will only spread the stain wider. You are not a private gentleman who may marry where he pleases and be forgotten in a month. You are Merriton. There has been a Duke of Merriton in this country since before these people's grandfathers had names to sign, and you carry all of it, the title, the honor of it, the place your house has always held, and if you set upon that a wife whom the whole town believes to have spent her wedding night in another man's house, and to be perhaps that man's lawful wife even now, you do not raise me to your level. You drag your name down to the mire where I am lying. They will not stop talking because I am a duchess. They will talk the more, and the more sweetly, because now there is a duke in it to be laughed at. Every drawing room you have ever entered will have its jest about the Merriton marriage. Your sons, and here for the first time her voice was not quite steady, and she stopped and mastered it and went on, your sons will grow up under it. I have had time, these 3 days, to think of nothing else, and I see it all as plainly as I see you. You crossed a whole country in a night to save me from ruin. I will not repay you by making you share it. I answered her as a man answers who is fighting for his life, which I was. I told her the town's memory was short and its favor bought back easily enough. I told her I was rich enough and old enough and stubborn enough to outlast any scandal that ever ran. I told her, growing warmer, that I had a right to be ruined if I chose, that it was my name and my choosing, that she took a great deal on herself to be so tender of a thing I flung down gladly at her feet. And there, in my heat, I made my worst misstep, for I said meaning it for love, hearing too late how it fell that I could not in honour do otherwise now, that after the night we had passed, after the world's talk, my honour itself required that I marry her and stop their mouths, whatever it cost. I had meant to bind her with the strongest cord I owned. I saw the instant it left me that I'd cut the last one. She rose from her chair. She had been pale. Now a little colour came into her face and her head went up, and I saw the pride that I so loved and had so to suffer from stand up in her full height. Honour, she said very low, you would marry me to satisfy your honour. Then I thank God I have enough my own left to refuse you. No, your grace, I will not be a duty. I will not be the debt a good man pays because the world was watching when he did me a kindness. If you cannot have me for gladness before a world that smiles on it, you shall not have me at all out of pity and duty and the shreds of your good name. I had rather go down alone with what is my own than be lifted up as the thing your honour could not decently drop. And though I protested, though I took it back, though I swore it was love and not duty, though I said everything a desperate man says, it was too late. She had heard the word, and she had found in it the very weapon her pride and her fear had been reaching for, and she would not put it down. She said she would go away. She had a little money that was truly her own, past the great frozen fortune, enough to live small and quiet somewhere the name of Carew meant nothing. She would go there and bear her disgrace where it could touch no one but herself, and she begged me, this was the hardest of all, she begged me for her sake to let her go, and to let it be seen that I had let her go, so that the world might have its story of the Duke who came to his senses, and leave me my honour clean. She asked me to save her a second time by abandoning her, and she meant it. That was the terror of it. She was not playing the woman's game of being pressed and yielding. She meant every word, and she had the strength to keep to it, and I could see that she had. I left that cold parlour I hardly know how, and stood in the mean little street outside with the dusk coming down, and for the first time in the whole of that dreadful business I did not know what I was to do. Consider how I stood. The woman I had loved for a silent year and ridden through a night to save, safe now in her body and lost to me utterly by the very nobleness that made me love her, put herself with her own hands beyond my reach and asked me to help her stay there. The villain who had done it all was gone into the dark with his lie already loose and running through the town faster than any truth of mine could chase it, his hand shut fast on her name and her fortune both, and the one proof that could break his grip, the register of his first marriage. The living witness of it scattered somewhere across the kingdom where I had not yet found so much as a thread of it. The law told me 5 years. The world had shut its doors and would not open them. Her guardian had washed his hands. Her friends had turned their backs. Her own high heart had turned against her hardest of all. I had crossed a country in a night, and I had come, for all my speed, too late, not too late to save her from Dema. but too late to save her from the slower thing he had set moving behind him, which no gallop could outrun. I stood in that darkening street, a man who had never in his life been beaten at anything he had set his whole strength to, and I felt myself beaten, and I looked up at the one lit window of that poor house where she sat, and I could see no way through, none, not any. And the night came down over the town and over her name and over every hope I had, and there was nothing in it anywhere that I could see, gave me the smallest light to go on by. It is the way of despair that it lies to us about how long it will last, and mine, that lasted no more than a fortnight, gave itself out as eternal. The light, when it came not from any brilliance of my own, but from the humblest quarter. And I have thought since that there is a justice in that, for the whole plot against Helena had been built by clever men, and it was undone in the end by the plain memory of a wronged woman who had never in her life been called clever by anyone. I had set my riders on every road, as I have said, and my money on every wharf and coaching inn, upon the reasoning that Damer had scattered the proof of his first marriage too wide to be gathered. But I had reasoned from his cunning and forgotten his cruelty, and it was his cruelty that betrayed him. For the first wife, whom he had cast off years since and left to shift as she might in a mean lodging in Bristol, under a name not her own, was not, as his lawyers gave out, some doubtful creature whose very wifehood might be argued away. She was a decent, frightened, badly used woman named Margaret, who had a marriage lines in a box and a horror of the man who had ruined her, and who had held her tongue all those years for no better reason than that she believed the law would side with a baronet against a deserted wife, and that speaking would only fetch him back to her door. What loosed her tongue at last was the newspaper. The very tale Damer had printed to bury Helena carried his own name up and down the kingdom in a triumph. Sir Lucius Damer, the injured husband, the wronged bridegroom. And it was read aloud in a Bristol parlour to a shrinking woman who knew that name better than she knew her own, and who understood, sitting there, that the man who had thrown her away was now calling another woman his wife before the whole world, and making her out a monster into the bargain. Something in her that had lain beaten for years stood up. She did not come to me. She would not have dared come to a duke. She went, with her box under her arm and her heart in her mouth, to the only respectable man she knew, the curate of her parish, and the curate, God bless the plain clergy of England, wrote to the very lawyers in the Temple over whom I had been standing and storming, because their advertisement for any who knew of the marriage of Lucius Damer had been posted in his church porch. I had the letter in my hand within the week, and Margaret herself in that same Temple chamber within the fortnight, and the box opened upon the table before those grave men who did not deal in the end, and the end was there plain as a headstone. The register of the parish where Damer had married her, a true entry in a true book 15 years old, with the living clergyman who had made it yet to be found and sworn, the marriage lines, and the woman breathing, weeping, holy and unmistakably alive, to be looked upon by any court in the land. Against that, the whole card castle of caveats and claims that his hired men had raised could not stand an hour. His marriage to Helena was not doubtful, to be argued 5 years. It was void from the first word the false clergyman had spoken over them, and I watched the law that had told me 5 years take the thing in hand and finish it in a single term. The ecclesiastical court declared the pretended marriage null, a nullity ab initio, as though it had never been, declared Helena Carew no wife of his and never 1 hour his wife, and swept his dead hand clean off her name and off her fortune both at a stroke. The great frozen portion thawed and was hers, freely and beyond any man's touching, hers to keep or to give as she and no one else should choose. And Damer himself the same law reached for at last. Bigamy was a felony, and the proof of it now sat weeping in a Temple chamber. The abduction of an heiress by force was a crime the county would gladly hang a man for. And there were, besides, the frauds by which he had procured the false marriage, forged license and bribed clerk, enough to have sunk 3 men. Warrants went out for him under his own proud name. He did not stay to meet them. Whatever hole he had run to when I broke his door on the coast, he broke from it now in earnest, and got himself by night onto a vessel out of a western port, and away to the continent a ruined and a hunted man, his fortune spent upon the very lawyers who had failed him, his name a byword, his estate seized, forbidden the shores of England on pain of the rope. I never saw his face again and was glad of it, for I had gone to that coast with murder in my heart, and it is better for a man's soul that the law took him out of my hands. He ended, I heard long after, in some cheap foreign town, quarrelsome and poor and shunned even by the scavengers of his own kind, and died there of a fever with no English hand to close his eyes. And if that seems a small vengeance for so great a wickedness, I have come to think that to be stripped of everything and left to rot outside the country he disgraced is a heavier sentence than any I could have dealt him with a pistol. Now understand what all this had done, not in law, but in the eye of the world. For a lie in the drawing rooms is not killed by a decree of court, unless someone with the standing to be heard carries the decree in and lays it on the table. The tale that had ruined Helena rested on one prop, that she had gone willingly, that she was a light woman who had chosen Damer, or worse, been his wife in earnest and was now being lied out of it. The court's finding kicked that prop clean away. Here it was, sworn and sealed and printed in its turn, that there had been a living wife the whole time, that the marriage flung in Helena's teeth was a criminal fraud worked upon her by force and trick, that she had been carried off against every struggle she could make and held a prisoner and rescued, that she was, in the plain finding of the law of England, not a fallen woman but a wronged one, the innocent victim of a felon now fled the kingdom to escape the gallows. The truth I had known from the first at last had teeth, and I saw to it that it bit. I have said the world would receive me but not her, that I was Merriton, and that a name 400-year-old opens most things in England. I had spent that name free enough in private and found the doors shut. Now I spent it in the open, and did not care who saw me do it. I took Helena Carew upon my arm, she consenting to this much, for it touched her vindication and not yet her heart, and I walked with her the length of every place that had shut its doors, and I dared the town by my mere countenance to say to my face what it had whispered behind her back. I gave a great dinner at Merriton House, and let it be known precisely who would sit at the head of my table, and I watched the same people who had looked through her to the trees discover, all at once, that they had never for a moment believed the shameful tale, that they had always known her for the injured innocent she was, that indeed they had said so from the beginning. I dare say some of them even thought it true. The machine that had shut those doors so quietly opened them again with the same quietness, and I own I took a hard pleasure I am not wholly proud of in standing by while it did, and in remembering, and in letting them see that I remembered. As for Mr. Barnaby Kell, who had washed his prudent hands of his ward when there was nothing left to squeeze from her, I did him no violence beyond the truth, which was violence enough. When the fortune thawed, and it was seen whose it was, and when the accounts of his long guardianship came, as I saw to it that they came, before men who knew how to read them, it was found that the honest deceived gentleman had helped himself, year upon year, to sums that were never his, and though for Helena's sake I brought no prosecution that would have dragged her name again through a court, I saw that every drawing-room he cared for knew exactly what manner of guardian he had been, and he found his own doors, in their turn, growing strangely hard to open. He retired to the country and to a well-earned obscurity, and troubled us no more. So the villain was broken and the wronged woman was righted, and the world that had cast her out stood ready, the fickle thing, to gather her back and coo over her, and I thought, fool that I still was in that one corner of my understanding, that my war was won. It was not. There remained the hardest fought of all, and it was held against me by the one person in the whole affair whom I loved, and it could not be carried by any decree of court or any spending of my name. Helena thanked me for her vindication with a full heart and a clear eye. And when I came round again, as I had sworn to myself I would the instant she was free, to the matter of our marriage, she was as gentle and as immovable as she had been in the cold parlour, and for a reason that the whole turn of events had, if anything, made stronger. "You have given me back my name," she said. "That was justice, and you did it because you are just, and I will thank you for it on my knees all my life. But my name being clean does not make me your equal, and you know it does not. The court has said I was wronged. It cannot make the world forget that I was talked of. It cannot unsay a season of laughter, and a duke does not marry a woman who has been the meat of every dinner in London, and think his house no lighter for it. You did all this for me out of the goodness that is the very thing I love in you, and do you not see that if you crown it now by marrying me, every soul who watched will say, There, it was as we thought. He was entangled past drawing back. He did it because he could not in honor do less. I will not be the deed your honor required. I said that to you once and meant it. And I mean it the more now that you have earned the whole world's good word and might have any woman in it. Have one they will all be glad of. Do not throw the last of your consequence after the first for a point of chivalry. I had learned something in that dreadful fortnight, and I did not answer her this time as a man argues a case. I had argued before and lost by it, and worse than lost, for it was in argument that I had once let slip the fatal word honor and armed her against me. I did not argue now. I crossed the room to where she stood, and I took both her hands in mine, and I made her look at me, and I told her the plain truth that I had been too proud or too clumsy ever to lay wholly bare. Helen, I said, listen to me and do not answer until I have done, for I too can only say this once. You speak of chivalry and of honor and of the deed my consequence requires, and you build your refusal upon them, and I tell you they have nothing to do with it. I did not love you because it was honorable. There was nothing honorable in it. You were promised to a wedding breakfast, and I stood by a whole silent year and loved you and had no right to. When they came and told me you were taken, I did not send my honor after you. I sent myself. I rode a horse into the ground on me that night and killed it, God forgive me, and when it fell I went on afoot in the dark, 'cause I could not wait for another, and I did not once in all those black hours think of my name or my consequence or what the world would say. I thought of you. Of nothing on this earth but you. A man does not do that for a point of honor, Helena. He does it for the one thing he cannot live without, and I found out that night, past all unsaying, what that one thing was. She had gone very still, and her hands were trembling in mine, and I held them the faster and went on, for I had crossed a country to say this, and I would say it all. You think I offer you my name to mend your name. I am offering you my name because I want yours joined to it before the whole sneering world, and the sooner and the more openly the better. Do you imagine I count myself lowered by marrying you? I count myself honored, I, who watched you carried off and could not stop it, and rode all night to reach you, and reached you, and could not until now say the thing I most wanted to say in the world. You are afraid that loving me will ruin me. Put the fear down. There is only one way left that you can ruin me, and that is to send me out of this room without you a second time, 'cause I have already lost you once to that man's wickedness, and I will not lose you to your own nobleness, which is a harder thing to fight and a dearer. I am not asking you to let me save you. You are saved, the law saved you, and the truth saved you. I am asking you to marry me because I have loved you all along, and I crossed a whole country in one night to prove it, and I will cross a great deal more than that before I let you go beyond my reach again. Not out of honor, not out of pity. For gladness. Helena, you said I might not have you unless it were for gladness, before a world that smiles on it. Then have me so. There was never anything but gladness in it. Marry me. She wept then, which she had not done through all the rest of it. Through the abduction and the terror and the ruin and the cold parlor. She wept now at being told at last that she was not a burden born but a thing chosen, and I gathered her up and held her and let her, and did not say another word, for I had said them all. And when she could speak, she did not say no. She said my name, only my name, Dominic, which she had never once in all our thwarted year been let to say, and she said it as a woman says the thing she has given up hoping for and finds, incredibly, held out to her after all, and that was her yes. And I have never in my life heard a sweeter one, nor needed a plainer. We were married that autumn, in the parish church of Merriton, where my people have been married and buried these 4 centuries, and we were married openly and by daylight, and in the sight of everyone who cared to come, and a very great many came. There was no false clergyman this time, and no forged license, and no register signed in fear. There was the old rector who had christened half the parish, and the true book, and Helena's plain hand and mine set down in it side by side, where no man living could ever unsay them. She came to me in no borrowed black, but in the colours of a bride, and walked up that aisle past the very faces that had looked through her in the park, and gave me her hand before them all with her head as high as ever. I had loved to see it carried, and became, in the face of the world that had tried to cast her out, the Duchess of Merriton. I have been told since that it was a fine wedding. I remember almost nothing of the show of it. I remember her hand in mine, and the steadiness of her voice where once it had trembled. And that when it was done and we came out together into the light, I felt, for the first time since the morning they tore her from her own wedding breakfast, that the world had been set back upon its right foundations and would hold. And that is the whole of it, and I have set it down honestly, the shame, the terror, and the slow mending, because I would have it remembered rightly and not in the drawing-room fashion. But if there is one thing out of all of it that I would have kept, it is not the court's decree, nor the villain's ruin, nor the doors that opened again so smoothly at the last. It is a plainer thing, and it is this. I have ridden many good horses in my life, and had the use of every ease that rank and money can command. And I never in all my days did anything to be half so proud of as the night I rode one of them into the ground, when it fell under me in the dark. Got up and went on afoot along a strange cold road toward the one light in the world that mattered to me. I reached her that night out of breath and out of horse and very nearly out of hope, and I have thought 1,000 times since how small a margin it was, how nearly I came too late. And so I made her, in the quiet of our own life together, one promise that was not in the marriage service and that I have kept as faithfully as any that was, whatever came, in all the long good years that were given us after, I would never again let her pass beyond my reach. And from that autumn day to this, though the whole world may believe what it pleases and be welcome, I never once have,